Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode we're recording today. I'm delighted to be joined by Naomi Fagan. She is currently pursuing her MA in teaching English to speakers of other languages from Tel Aviv University in Israel. She moved to Israel on September 2024 and has developed a deep connection with the country. And in her words, she never wants to leave. Despite not being required to serve in the army due to her age at the time of immigration, she still made the decision to volunteer for military service, believing it's the right thing to do after October 7th. So, thank you so much, Naomi, for taking your time and speaking to us today.
Of course. Thank
Could you
you for
share-
having me.
Thank you so much. Could you share where you're from and whether you have personally experienced any sort of anti-Semitism while you were in the US?
Sure. So hi, my name is Naomi. I'm from Long Island, New York. While I've never personally experienced it in a real life context, I've always been very active in social media, doing Hasbara content, promoting, and, trying to fight anti-BDS legislation and just trying to educate people through social media because we're that kind of generation. So I've never faced it in person, but because of the active presence I have on social media advocating for Israel, I do pretty frequently. It's stopped now, but pretty frequently I would get very hateful texts and messages from people on Instagram, strangers, total strangers that I've never met before, telling me to, I'm killing children in Gaza, the normal spiel. But I'm personally very lucky and happy that I've never had an experience in person with anti-Semitism where I'm from.
And in recent years, we have seen there's been a reported rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents across the US. So, from your perspective, how would you describe the current climate for Jewish people living in the United States?
Since I moved 9 months ago, I would honestly say my opinions have changed maybe ever so slightly. I did not feel as if I was pushed out due to anti-Semitism as like the main factor for why I moved here, but at the same time, it was definitely something I was keeping in mind when I was making this decision, that I felt like I was no longer accepted in America as a Jew, that my time was up, that I just had enough and I wasn't going to be welcome in institutions of education, or in the future I'd have trouble. I just felt like my time was up, that I just wasn't belonging in this. I didn't belong in the States anymore as an American Jew, or as a Jew. And I definitely think that the climate has changed over the past couple of years, with the start of the war after Hamas attacked Israel. I think that we definitely have seen a drastic shift in the climate, whereas all the anti-Semitism was still there, but now it's like almost they have a platform to be more vocal about it for the sake of stopping a genocide that doesn't exist. They use this as a moment to advocate for a non-existent problem, and that's where I feel like it really started to change the climate, where now, it depends on where you are living in America. Where I live, I'm very grateful to have a very strong central Jewish community. And so every time we do have incidents, it's very random and it's scary, in my specific area in New York. But in the city, in the five boroughs of Manhattan, we see it all the time. We see it on college campuses and in, smaller ways, just smaller, in smaller isolated incidents, but they're not really isolated anymore. They're all together. And I honestly think that with the current climate, it's due to this idea of, the Jews are at fault for the non-existent genocide happening in Gaza. So it's a drastic shift where now they feel as if they can be more vocal about their anti-Semitism for the sake of saying it's because we just don't like Israel. No, it's because you just don't like Jews.
And if you look at historically, it's at an all-time low. The trust level that people have on the Jewish people, they want
Absolutely.
to work with Jewish people. And we've seen
Absolutely.
uh, an increasing protest on American campuses and discussion about globalizing the Intifada. Now, how do these developments impact like a sense of safety and belonging within the Jewish community in the US, or a student who is just want have nothing to do with Israel, an American Jew who wants to go and study in an American campus?
I think it's very sad what we're seeing that due to the rise in anti-Semitism especially on college campuses, we have, new crops of students every year or so, either post high school or post the gap year, that they're trying to pick which school to go to based on, multiple different factors. But a big part of, for example, my younger sister is 17. She'll be graduating high school in 2026 and she'll be going off to college. And my parents are trying to find an environment a campus where she won't feel like her Judaism, her safety because she's a Jew is threatened. But that's very difficult now. We have to look at all these factors where how does this campus handle student safety? Do they are they advocating for their Jewish students? Do they listen to their Jewish students who are facing harassment from from their peers? And I think it's very worrisome. I am grateful that I don't have to deal with it here, but at the same time, it just there's so many young minds who either will pick a different school because they don't feel like their safety as a Jew will be, well, they don't feel as if they will be safe on the college campus. So they're neglecting their education for their own personal safety, which should never have to happen. They should be able to go to an institution of learning and learn. It should not be something that is politically based, but yet it is. And it's always been like that, but now it's even worse. And then at the same time, I think that in some college campuses where we're seeing the US government dock the government funding that these campuses are supporting, they're taking it from the wrong places. At least that's my opinion. I do not believe that medical schools should have their funding redacted because of the anti-Semitism coming from the humanities department, where I think that students who want to learn will just go to campus, they will learn, they will not take part in these protests. Meanwhile, those who are pursuing degrees that might not necessarily have them in the classroom so much, they try to keep themselves busy, and that's almost how they get indoctrinated into anti-Israel groups without even realizing it. And I think that the campuses that we are seeing all these anti-Semitic incidences and the encampments on should be focusing more on, how to fix the specific departments where they're seeing the majority of students protesting coming from. It's not the medical students who just want to become doctors. It's not the lawyers. It's humanities departments. And we're seeing funding being redacted from places that really need it. Cancer research instead of, it might be a controversial opinion. However, I do believe that there are some universities where you can make your own degree, like you can kind of just take the classes as you choose. And those are typically where we see the most anti-Israel sentiment. And those are also typically the places where those students will become baristas and work at a fast food joint because they've spent the last 4 years indoctrinating themselves into hate and not not pursuing the education which their parents would have wanted them to pursue. And it's very tricky trying to find an environment where you can get all of those things and, not have to worry about your safety as a person. We just want to learn. That's all.
I somewhat understand what you're trying to explain, because I have friends who I have spoken to, and what they want to pursue higher education in the States, they have to more care about not which university is better for them professionally or what university will help them in the future, but rather what university is more safe for them to study. And
Absolutely.
that's something which we have increasingly seen from October 7. And you have covered a little bit, but Let's say someone like, which we have seen after October 7, a lot of Indian students on campus who are coming from India are going to US universities turning anti-Semitic. And you've seen a lot of videos of people who, on, let's say, an MIT graduation speech, bringing in what's happening in Palestine, which has nothing to do with what subject he or she might have chosen.
Not a thing. Yeah, exactly.
So, what do you believe are these underlying causes to contributing to this alarming trend? Because I can say for a matter of fact, anti-Semitism in India doesn't exist. So when they go to a college campus in America, what kind of indoctrination does a person go through in which they start behaving like this?
Honestly, I believe it comes from multiple factors. First, I believe it comes from the fact that in your freshman year, you're young, you're very impressionable. I know I definitely was. I'm also very lucky in a way that my first couple of semesters were off campus because of Corona. At that time when I was young, I was 18, I was definitely very impressionable. And I'm very happy that I did not get exposed to lies and false information about apartheid in Israel or, open air prison or any of those buzzwords they like to throw out because they really feed into the naivety of students who, you post this child is starving because of Israel and they feel for it because they try to, play the into your humility. And students who are young and just graduated high school, they're basically still children. They will fall for it. And that's, I believe, a huge factor is that these groups on campus, they prey on young students. At the same time, I also think that professors who frequently push a political agenda, regardless of whether or not it's the university's position, it is their position. And they will pursue and promote a political agenda and essentially try to indoctrinate their students into that political agenda. And frequently, I see it in classes that have no political points at all. It'll just be a slight comment, something that you won't even realize, like a Freudian slip, but it'll get you thinking, and then it goes down the wormhole of, wow, let me check out these groups. Let me see what that professor said. He said something interesting. Let me look it up. And there's so much misinformation, and I do believe that professors are not helping to curb that. I think that they are furthering it because they want students to, join the cause, I guess. And then a third thing, I think it comes from the parents. I think it depends on how the kids were raised, in which household they were in. I was always told, my interests, I need to find my own opinions. I need to make them myself. But I was definitely influenced in such a way to lean more towards this way or that way. But I also knew that, I have the freedom to find my own opinions and to, build up my own resolutions about things. And I still did it in what I believe is the correct way. I'm still a Zionist. I believe that my parents have a huge factor in it, but I also know that they gave me the freedom to choose what I wanted. I just had the brains to look up facts and to pursue facts and not fiction. I believe that a lot of these students are either raised in households where they're given maybe too much freedom to do whatever they want, because then we see these students pursuing degrees which will not help them in real life. Because I mean, if it's not the government paying for it, then I'm going to just assume it's the parents or maybe themselves. But in majority of the cases, I'm just going to assume it's the parents paying for it. And something I've been seeing a lot on the internet and just in conversation before I moved here, in conversation with family friends over the table at Shabbat lunch, do these parents know what their children are up to? Do they know that this is what their child is doing when they are sending them to get a degree, spending the hundreds of thousands of dollars just a semester, and this is what their children will have to show for it? And I think those three factors really influence like I think that they contribute to this trend of how we see the rise of anti-Semitism on campus. And then I would say for non-Jews and Jewish communities alike, the best way to fix it is just education. But I also believe that at a certain point, you need to take drastic measures. I think that, we're seeing deportations of leaders of encampments, which everyone's like, no, but it's, it's horrible. It's not democratic, whatever. If you're on a green card and you are here supporting terrorism, you should be deported. I think it's just as simple as that. And we need the non-Jewish communities to support this, and hopefully, eventually, people will be smart enough that they can just understand through simple education.
No, I absolutely agree with that because if you are on a student visa, let's say, and you're breaking American law, you should be punished. I
Absolutely.
I find it so funny that people are protesting about the fact that they can get away doing anything and hating Jewish communities who are citizens of those countries, and yet when they are being threatened with deportation, they feel there's a violation of their fundamental right, which is a very funny incident, and it's been happening in the US for the last 1 year. But this brings me to a question that it's not just, you know, that you're calling for an action, but there are things actually happening for the last, if you see for the last one
Yeah.
month, there have been a call to action and people have come on street and have taken those actions. Uh, I want to talk about two incidents. One is the shooting of the two Israeli diplomats outside the
Yeah.
Jewish Museum, and the tragic incident that happened in Colorado where a Jewish crowd was set on fire. Now, if you have any other incidents from your own community or your city, you could also share about that. But how do you personally feel about this as a Jew in America right now? Because it's not just they're saying something, but they're actually doing it on the streets.
I honestly think that it is very scary. I'm grateful that I don't have to live with it anymore. Honestly, I feel less afraid dealing with a war on seven fronts living here in Tel Aviv than I did if I was still living in America. I feel very safe here. I cannot really say the same for my family, even though where my parents and where I used to live in Long Island, we do have incidents. They're very isolated. But when they do happen, it's very scary. We recently had I believe it was three incidences that they don't believe they were connected, but they happened in such succession. I just really don't understand how. Two Israeli businesses were broken into, destroyed, and I believe set on fire. And there is a community center, maybe a 15-minute walk, 10-minute walk from my house, a 2-minute drive, where someone vandalized it. There was a banner saying 50,000 dead Gazan children. And it's very well known that that center is where people go to volunteer to pack things for Israeli soldiers to send them to Israel. And since October 7th, we have not had anything like this in my community. So when it does happen, it is very frightening. And because of the normal standard of safety in my area, it's like everyone's like up in arms, like what's happening? Like we live in a bubble. And I think that when we see all these incidences happening in Colorado, um in DC, I it's connected because these people are attacking Jews because of what they see in the media. I don't, if maybe there could be a history of, each individual who decided to, murder Jews. Maybe down there in their history, they were very anti-Semitic, or maybe they woke up one day, saw a post about 50,000 dead Gazan children, and decided I need to do something. And so instead of, protesting Israel or, trying to find out facts or whatever, they just go and killed Jews. And the misinformation we're seeing online is making America very unstable and very unsafe because they take what they see at face value. And again, it plays into your humanity. You feel bad, you feel upset, this is horrible, I must do something about it. And I would say, okay, you see something wrong and you don't, it's injustice, whatever. The normal thing would just be, I guess protest, whatever. But instead, what we're seeing is just violence. And it's, I don't know if I would mind I definitely still mind, but I don't know if I would mind as much if they were peaceful protests, which is a very vague thing nowadays. It doesn't exist anymore because all these encampments are supposedly peaceful, but all they're doing is screaming and spewing hate. We're seeing the riots in LA because of deportation, and somehow they just connect it back to Hamas. I don't know. They connected back to Gaza, and they're trying to take over every single other political agenda to further their own non-existent one. And we see the incidences happening all over the country because people are being misinformed and they are associating Israel with Jews, which is ironic because then you have other anti-Zionist organizations who don't associate. Like you have Jewish Voice for Peace. You have JVP, who they claim to, Israel has no relation to Judaism. They're totally separate. And then you have these monsters who are murdering Jews and attacking Jews because they associate the two together. And it's just pick a side. I need to know, do you hate us because we have an intrinsic tie to Israel? It's our ancestral homeland. Or do you hate us just because we're Jewish and you just are extremely misinformed about the conflict, and instead of, writing a strongly worded letter to your congressman or doing research into the conflict and finding out, at least presenting facts, and then obviously getting new information because the facts that you're getting from social media and Greta Thunberg are wrong, you just go the complete opposite direction and be violent and aggressive and kill people.
It's a very interesting point you're touching because if you see, it's not about the fact that they hate Israel because the two, if I take about the example of the two Israeli diplomats who were killed outside a Jewish museum, they were only shot, the attacker did not know who the person were. And he only shot because there were people who were coming outside a Jewish museum, which makes him
Yeah.
a target for his hate crime, and he shouted Free Palestine. And now, if you look at the list of anti-Semitic incidents or foiled attacks, it's a synagogue, it's a Jewish community. These are all visible Jewish communities, not Israeli supporting communities. So
Yeah.
what has happened over the past 2 years is that Jews in America are unsafe because of the fact of their faith, not because of what they stand in the conflict.
I just think in certain communities, um, there are communities of Jews in New York who, while they're not anti-Semitic, they're not like Neturei Karta. They're just not very vocal about Israel, which is very fine. However, because of their appearance and because people associate Jew with Israel, regardless of their political opinions, they could have voted Democrat or Republican or whatever. They might not have even ever been to Israel, but because they look a certain way, they are targeted based on a political agenda they might not even follow. And that's what's very scary. They don't even have to be Jewish or be pro-Israel. As long as you're there by association, even just walking down the street past a Jewish museum, it makes you a target. And it's, if you would like reverse it, if it was a nightclub and they were straight, like if I saw something like an analogy, if it was for the DC attack, for the attack in DC at the Jewish Museum, if it was a gay nightclub and two people were killed, but only one of them was gay, does the other one just not matter? Because the two people who were killed, one was supposedly Christian, one was this. Who cares? It's still an attack, and they're still targeted regardless of their political affiliation. They're targeted because they happen to be there. And this is coming from that violent misinformation that we are seeing on the internet, and it's very scary.
I agree. And what I wanted to ask you was that when we look at terrorism, for example, there are levels in which people indoctrinate or radicalize. And the last stage is someone who would go out on the street and start killing. How do you see about a college student or someone who is a working professional in their early 20s, 30s get to an extent that they don't believe that you will just go on the street and protest, but they will go and start killing people?
Mental illness. I honestly I wish I had a better answer than that. I truly think it's just they're very, very stupid and they need to be checked into a mental institution to fix that. Because obviously, college is supposed to be a place of higher education. They obviously lack it. College degrees do not mean you're smart, and we're seeing that so often nowadays. I think that they just need serious help. It's how could they have gotten like so bad? Like what happened? And I wish I had an answer. I mean, I gave like three, like the parents, parental interference, the professors on campus, and just it being an impressionable young mind. But we're not seeing like we're seeing grown adults do take carrying out a lot of these attacks. Not they're not always children or like 18-year-olds. These are grown people who are supposedly college educated, and yet they don't have the abilities to believe something past face value. They don't have the abilities to check credentials, to check resources. They ignore facts when they're put in their face. We see Greta Thunberg, who is the most spoiled, obnoxious child I've ever seen, by the way, who her flotilla team of activists, when they, were kidnapped. It's very frustrating, by the way, that that's what they're, and that's how they're referring to themselves as being kidnapped. Also hilarious. It's just a sidebar that when they did get kidnapped, they threw all of their geographical tracking equipment into the sea, which I thought her whole thing was like pro-environmentalist, but they just littered. Anyway, and I think it's just, when they were told, okay, we're going to show you the video of October 7th, the 43 minutes of, videos that Israel compiled, they refused, they turned away, and it's just, they refuse to even, listen to another side. It's one thing to, okay, debate, make an argument, and I can, at least have the courtesy to have a conversation, regardless of whether or not your opinion will be changed. I respect you so much more if you are willing to sit down and have a conversation with me instead of just screaming in my face. I don't care if your opinion will or change or will not change. I respect you enough for trying to have a conversation with me. Whereas we see these political activists that refuse to even do that, that attack, Jewish influencers and Jewish Israeli social media content creators in their direct messages, and it's always the Jewish or the Israeli person side is very respectful, trying to just pursue an open-minded conversation, and it's always the refusal on the part of the pro-Palestinian. And I think it just really reflects their lack of conduct, lack of respect, which obviously they have none, but you cannot claim to be an intellectual who wants to pursue facts if you are unwilling to hear the other side, or even broaden your mind. Even if it doesn't change your mind, at the very least, accept that other people have another position and maybe try to have a respectful conversation. And that's just not something we're seeing.
Wanted to end in a tone which is slightly positive, or maybe you could tell if it's the right way to think about this, but do you feel that, or are you any kind of optimistic about the fact that there could be ways or necessary actions could be taken to improve the security and build the confidence of the community in the wake of these tragic incidents that are happening against Jews, or is there no other safer place for Jews than Israel right now?
I think I think that it's honestly very scary that people are saying that Israel is the only safe place for Jews, because it used to be like maybe the opposite during the years of the Intifadas. It was obviously not a very safe place, and maybe in Jews in the diaspora were significantly safer. But now we're seeing this switch around that regardless of whether or not we are in a war, which we almost always are, we are now safer because at least we're united against one front for the most part. I honestly think that best measure for my American friends, if you're all listening, just buy a gun. Don't wait for something to happen. I think that I have a lot of friends that while I do know they're Zionists, I wish they would be more vocal. I wish they would be more outspoken. And I know that some of them are not as outspoken because of the safety of their campus or lack thereof, because they feel unsafe, because they don't want to lose their friends, which I can understand. But I also think that when you look towards the future, is that someone you want to be friends with? Is that someone that you want to associate with? Regardless of whether or not they share your political opinion, someone who is like, if you are worried that you're going to lose friends because you posted something pro-Israel, they should not have been your friends in the first place. If they cannot respect your opinion and have a normal, respectful discourse, then it's just not necessary. And first and foremost, back to what I said, buy a gun. Arm yourselves, protect yourselves, put you and your family and your community first, and then worry about everyone else. I think that the attacks we see do not just affect the Jewish community, the Jewish parts of community. It's the safety of the entire area. You know, if this can happen to anyone at this event, we see in communities, not just in America, but in Europe, people driving through crowds at events that aren't Jewish. It's not anti-Jewish or anti-Israel sentiment. It's radical Islam. And we need to understand that, you know, it starts with the Jews. You want to fix it, you want to prevent it. You see it happening because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, then eventually it's just not going to be Israel-Palestine. It's going to be radical Islam against the world. And we need to start from bottom up. You need to start protecting your community from radical Islam. And I think that when we see these smaller incidences in communities where they don't typically have them, it really does shake the confidence. Like, what's happening in my bubble? This is not normal. And I think that people are scared when in reality we should be angry. We should not be afraid. We should not be upset. We need to turn it into anger and use the anger to fuel the safety measures that we will now take in the future to protect ourselves, protect our neighbors. Jewish or not Jewish, we are all under threat.
Thank you so much for elaborating that
Of course,
answer.
thank you.
And thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.